Welcome to Reaching Abundance. I'm Virginia Elder, your host. This is the podcast where you get weekly cliff notes on developing mental fortitude and podcast marketing strategies from top business owners. Ready to level up your show? Start by booking a call with me using the link in the episode description. Let's get into the episode. Today, we're diving into podcast growth tactics that go beyond the typical advice you hear. Things like, just post on social media. We all know there's more to it than that. So, today I'm breaking down specific actions you can take to increase your reach, get in front of your ideal audience, and grow your podcast the same way you'd grow your business. Whether you're a seasoned podcaster or just starting out, these tips will help you create a growth strategy that's sustainable and effective. Podcast growth falls into three core categories: content, visibility, and networking. Content is where your content plan, niche topics, and consistency come in. If you're not delivering value that your target audience needs, none of the other tactics matter. If you're seeking specific advice on content, I shared quite a bit in episode 27 as part of a mini-series. That episode was called Podcasting for Client Acquisition. If you missed it, I highly suggest you go back and listen. Next, visibility. Are you being found? SEO, podcast directories, and making your episodes accessible on multiple platforms, including YouTube, are all critical for this. When it comes to networking, you can't podcast in a bubble. Whether it's guesting on other shows, having guests on your show, or attending live or virtual events, expanding your network is crucial. We'll break these three core categories down further, but first it's important to recognize which area you need to focus on most. Before you jump into trying every growth tactic or even just feeling overwhelmed at all the work you quote-unquote have to do, pause. Take a step back and evaluate where your podcast might need the most attention. Here are a few questions to ask yourself that will help you self-audit your show and reveal where you have the biggest gap so you can start working in that area first. This little pop quiz self-assessment will help you decide which of the three pillars that I just reviewed, content, visibility, and networking, you need to work on. Question 1. You love your content, but is it really landing with them? Log into your podcast host account, which is Buzzsprout, Castos, Podbean, Libsyn. It's wherever you upload your MP3 so that it goes live. Once inside, take a look at your episode titles. Would your ideal listener search for any of the titles that you see there? If so, great. Give yourself a little happy face. If not, you need to create episodes with titles based on what your ideal client needs and would search for or click on. Then, what are your download numbers doing? Are they trending up or plateauing? Review listener feedback or surveys if you have them. If you don't have them, create them. Use the poll feature on LinkedIn or Facebook or even Instagram stories. Create a Google form to send to your past and current clients or send it to your current network. Just start to gather information about what they want to hear from you. Question 2. Is your podcast easy to find? For this one, I literally want you to Google your own podcast. When you type your own show's name into Google, what comes up? Are you showing up where you expect to? Is your show really listed on every podcast app possible? I'm including a resource in the show notes with instructions on how to make sure. The next step to figuring out if your podcast is easy to find is your podcast on your own website? Is it featured on your homepage or easy to find when someone types in your business name? Next, have you added your podcast to your social media platforms? On Instagram and Facebook, you could add a link in your profile section so followers can click to listen to your show. On LinkedIn, your podcast can be added as a quote unquote featured item on your profile page. Another component to this is, are you posting episodes to YouTube? Even if your show is audio only, yes, it can and should be listed on YouTube. Think outside the box too. Beyond listening apps and YouTube, are there industry or conference directories where you can get your show listed? Find the people that create those best of lists or niche specific roundup style posts where they list the top 10 shows for whatever. Could you find some applicable lists and reach out to those creators to get your show added? Question 3 in this self-assessment is, are you leveraging networking opportunities? Look at how often you're guesting on other podcasts or having guests on your show. You need to ask yourself, how am I gaining exposure to new people? If you're not guesting on other shows, start today. I have trusted industry partners to get you good guest spots. If you need help with that, just reach out. You might be saying, well, my show isn't structured for guests. I don't do interviews. Well, maybe there's a way you could just get a quote or a short clip from someone rather than doing a full interview. And you can just feature that little snippet in your episode. You can still feature that person's name in your show notes and still create searchability and hype around that featured guest, even if it's just a quote or 60 seconds of them saying something really impactful. If you need specific guidance there, I love strategizing optimal show structures. Again, just reach out. The next component to this is, are you attending local events, networking groups, online summits, or conferences where ideal listeners are also in attendance? If not, pick one new networking thing to attend regularly. Don't do all of these at once. You'll get overwhelmed. But with each one you join, just evaluate it every quarter to see if you still feel reciprocal value there. If your ideal clients aren't in the room, it's probably not quite the right group for you, and I suggest trying a different one until you do find a very strong reciprocal value. Okay, so in this self-audit, I already gave you quite a bit of advice. As a recap, here were those 3 main growth audit questions. Is your content really landing? Is your podcast easy to find? And are you leveraging networking opportunities? If, as I was asking those 3 main growth audit questions, you recognized areas of improvement, go do those things. If you need more time with those questions, or you want to pause and look at your numbers or shoot me a message because you need a strategy session or my guest booking connection, that's fine. Pause and do that right now. If there are gaps you've identified already in this self-audit, stop here. Get a sheet of paper and go write down the to-dos, ideas, and questions you already have in your mind based on the questions and tips I've already provided. If you need to, go back to minute 4 of this episode and re-listen to this section with your pen in hand and take notes on what comes to mind. Remember, the world isn't short of ideas. it is short of people willing to take action on them. The rest of this episode will be spent expanding on 4 podcast growth tactics that will feed the 3 categories we started with: content, visibility, and networking. So when you're ready to hear more about guesting, leveraging social media, SEO, and networking, and how to do each of these things well, then you can come back and hit play. All right, if you're still listening, I'm assuming that you took that audit seriously, took care of business, took notes, and took action on the few things that came to mind during the self-audit. And then now you're ready to hear about the 4 growth tactics that are going to feed those 3 categories. Let's get started. The top 4 growth tactics are: 1, guesting on other podcasts; 2, leveraging social media beyond just posting; 3, SEO, optimizing your podcast for search; and 4, networking at events. Let's start with growth tactic number 1. Guesting is one of the most effective ways to grow your following in general, but also your podcast. Why? Because you're tapping into someone else's already established audience. Here's how to approach it. For 1, find the right shows. Look for podcasts that share a similar target audience. This isn't about finding the biggest shows, it's about finding the right shows. 2, prepare a clear message. You want to bring value to their audience. Prepare a list ahead of time with actionable advice, strategies, or tips to share, and make sure to mention your own podcast during your interview. Spend your time as a guest on helping the listeners and supporting the host's goals. That effort will be reflected back to you, I promise. The third opportunity here: use guest networks. There are websites and platforms dedicated to connecting podcast hosts with guests. Utilize them to expand your network. If you're going the free or DIY route, explore guesting and podcasting Facebook groups or the paid platforms Podmatch and podcastguests.com. Those links are in this episode's description. These come with the caveat that your payment is your time. I've even wanted to get more involved in those platforms for years, and I'm finally just throwing my hands up. I need someone to do that legwork for me. So if you want me to share my guest booking connection with you to get on other shows, email me. All right, the second growth tactic: leveraging social media. You and I both know you have to do more than just post on social media. If you're just posting episode announcements or graphics or your cover art on social media, but you're not actually engaging with people on that platform, you're not growing. Here's how to shift gears. Engage with your audience. I don't care if you have 10 followers or 10,000. You have to respond to comments, ask questions on other people's posts, create polls. Social media isn't just a one-way street. So if you're just posting your cover art or an episode announcement each week, you are going to hear crickets no matter how big your following is. It's not likely someone is going to see that and stop scrolling, click away to an entirely different platform to find your podcast. So you have to ask, what can I share about this episode that's so enticing they'll really want to listen? That's how you create your social media post about your episode. All right, next, leverage different formats. Record your episode's video even if you aren't publishing the full video, because you need to use it for Reels, Stories, or TikTok posts. Take advantage of this video forward phase we're in right now, and remember that All some people watch are stories. All some people do is scroll through reels. So play to your ideal customer or listener. How are they consuming social media right now? And then do that. Next, collaborate with others. Consider Instagram or LinkedIn Lives with past guests or other podcasters in your space. Make sure you're tagging relevant, featured people like guests in your posts. On Instagram, make sure you're marking guests or co-hosts as collaborators. Cross-promotion works wonders here because their audience sees your post as well. So use the features wisely that are already built into the platform that just naturally help you leverage other people's audiences on social media. Okay, the third growth tactic here is SEO, optimizing your podcast for search. This is a game changer, and there's an invisible barrier here because it sounds harder or more complicated than it is. So most people avoid doing the work completely, and it hinders them. Don't be that person. Let me break it down a little for you so you can see that you, no matter how tech challenged you may be, can do podcast SEO well. First, I want you to focus on title optimization. This is the most important piece. Your episode titles are the primary thing that most search engines look at right now. All title optimization means is that the title to your episode should contain a phrase that clearly indicates what the episode is about. It should be something someone would type into Google. Avoid being clever or vague. Stick to what people are actually going to search for. Next on the SEO list is show notes and transcripts. Every podcast host account at this point has made it possible to upload your transcript for your episodes. This helps with SEO, but it's also just a great way to make your show accessible. So make sure you're including transcripts. I have this entire talk on SEO for show notes that I've done at conferences in front of hundreds of people. And the main thing you need to know is just to actually describe your episode in the description box. One sentence won't cut it. Write a paragraph or two, add some bullet points, and share some action steps listeners can take based on your episode. You have as many as 4,000 characters. So don't be the podcast that posts 200 characters and complains that no one can find you. Use this quote unquote free real estate to your advantage. Next on the list is website SEO. Your podcast should be featured on your business website if possible. If there's compliance issues and you have your podcast as an OBA or outside business activity, that's fine too. Have your podcast on its own website. And no, I don't mean the trashy free one provided by your podcast host account. I mean a real one that you can have designed to reflect your brand and that you can optimize with language, blog posts, graphics, meta descriptions, and more. Your goal with any website is to rank for terms that would make your target audience click and listen and eventually become clients. I can guide you more in depth on this separately, but your action step here is to choose 3 to 4 keyword phrases that are 2 to 4 words in length that reflect the solutions you provide. So 3 to 4 short phrases that are basically what your ideal client would search for if they needed to find you. Once you have those keyword phrases, make sure your old content has those keywords throughout it, or create new content that intentionally contains them. The fourth and final podcast growth tactic we're going to talk about in this episode is networking at events. When was the last time you had the opportunity to introduce yourself to a room of strangers and potentially develop business relationships with them? It's important you get out of your comfort zone and expose your brand to new people on a regular basis. Whether it's virtual or in person, networking events are perfect for getting the word out about your podcast. Here's how to maximize them. For one, be clear about what you do. You should have a 60-second quote-unquote elevator pitch ready. Now, there are lots of opinions out there about elevator pitches, and they sometimes have a bad rap, so let's clarify. You should be able to clearly state your name, how you help people, the types of people or niche in which you serve, and mention that you're the host of blank podcast. For me, this sounds like this. My name is Virginia Elder. I'm the founder of Podcast Abundance, the leading provider of audio and video podcast production for financial service professionals. You're invited to listen to the Reaching Abundance podcast, where I help business owners leverage their own podcast to market their business well. Inside that blurb, you heard who my ideal client and listener is: financial service professionals. What we do: audio and video production. Why? To help them leverage a podcast to market their business. Replicate this for your own business and show, and practice it looking in the mirror at yourself until you're comfortable with it and you feel natural doing it. The next tip I have for you in the networking space is to listen more than you talk. For podcasters, this tends to be quite challenging. Don't treat networking as a spray and pray session. Your goal is not to hand your card to every person in attendance. May as well toss your stack of cards in the trash. Instead, your goal is to identify a few connections with which you're interested in establishing a referral partnership, nurturing a customer relationship, or creating some type of collaboration. Make sure you aren't just talking about yourself the whole time. Instead, ask others about their businesses or podcasts first. When the conversation naturally shifts, mention yours and offer something of value related to the conversation. And finally, follow up after the networking event. This is where I failed miserably for years. Most people struggle with this step, so if you can create systems around follow-up and be good at it, you're destined for greatness. After the event, connect with the people you met, the organizers, and anyone of significance in attendance on social media. My go-tos are LinkedIn and Instagram these days. If nothing else, make sure you send a follow-up email. Networking is more than just a handshake at the event. Figure out how to continue the conversation and build relationships out of that initial meeting. Okay, so again, I am advising you not to do everything I shared in this episode at once. There was a self-audit at the beginning of this episode, remember? Go back to your evaluation. If you struggle with content, focus on creating a solid content plan and optimizing your topics. There's a little SEO that can be done here, but your primary focus is to ensure that what you're putting out is attracting people in. You may want to rework your content calendar, your recording schedule, or your show structure to include topics your ideal client needs and is searching for. If visibility is your issue, decide whether you're focusing on leveraging social media or SEO. From there, you can laser focus on the action steps I provided in that section. If you haven't been getting exposure to new people, Choose whether guesting or networking is your path. Then either set a goal to guest on 1 to 2 podcasts each month or register for 1 to 2 networking events, online summits, or even a conference. Overall, I want you to pick one area to start with. Take action and monitor the results over the next 6 months. You're not going to see results immediately. Podcasting, growth, business growth, networking, growing your following, all of these things are long-term commitments, tactics, and strategies to grow your business. You are not going to see results within the first month. Be consistent on whichever area you choose to focus for a set period of time. I suggest setting your minimum focus time at 6 months or longer. Podcast growth, like growing your business, again, is a long-term game. It's just like raising a family or improving your health. It's a recurring cycle of evaluation, implementation, and then tweaking until you see the results you want. These small steps you take today may not feel like much, but over time, those efforts compound. The work is never done, but that's part of the journey. Keep evaluating, keep growing, and remember, you've got this. If you need guidance in any of the areas I've mentioned, or if you don't have time or the bandwidth to evaluate your own show to figure out where you need to focus, I do have spots available for podcast audits. So if needed, there's a link in the show notes. Go ahead and book yours today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. I'd love to hear which piece of this conversation meant the most to you today. Head to reachingabundance.com/convo. If you're ready to market your business effectively with a podcast, let's talk. Click the book a call link in the description and I'll take it from there. Thanks for listening to Reaching Abundance. I'm Virginia Elder, and I'll be back next week with another insightful episode for you. Follow me on Instagram @podcastabundance to stay connected in the meantime.